to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about the importance of the 7th rank, obviously the 2nd rank from Black's perspective. Let's see the first example. In this position, where most of the pawns are symmetrically positioned, only the ones on the B file have a difference, with the white pawn being more advanced. Normally, rook endgames with even number of pawns end in a draw. However, out of all endgames, especially in rook endgames, the activity is very important. And in this case, the white rook is able to move immediately to the 7th rank. And what that will result is, on one hand, tie down the black rook into the defense of the B7 pawn. And on the other hand, it limits the activity, the mobility of the black king to the 8th rank. And thirdly, it targets pawns that are positioned on the 7th rank. So rook c7 is an absolutely very good move for white here. You may wonder, but how does white make progress? Well, progress can be made by slowly but surely creating a passed pawn, and the plan for that would be to activate the king, move it to d3, and then play f3 followed by e4. And then either black will have to trade the pawns on e4 and white creates a passed pawn on the d file, or black will allow white to capture on d5, and then that pawn will be a second target that white can attack. After this sample position, let's see a position from a real game. In fact, a game by one of the former world champions, the Cuban Jose Raul Capablanca, against one of the top grandmasters of his time, Tartakower. And this game was played at the famous New York tournament in 1924. Again, in this position, the rook activity is crucial, and therefore white immediately brings the rook to the h file with the idea to then enter to the 7th rank. Black is in an unfortunate situation that the rook is being busy tied down guarding the pawn on g6, and the active rook c6 move would fail to the pin with bishop to b5. Black responded in the game by playing king f8. But then the rook arrives on h7. It's important not only that the rook now attacks pawns on the 7th rank, but even more importantly that it limits the black king to that back rank, and the black king is purely on the defense, and in fact, in some cases, as we shall see later in the game, can become target of a mating attack. Black moved the rook to c6, looking for counterattack on the pawn on c3, now that there is no longer a pin with bishop b5. And white responded by playing g4. White is planning to advance on the king side. If now black takes the pawn on c3, bishop would take on g6, and having the two connected passed pawns on the king side on the f and g files, with the help of the bishop and the rook, white will very quickly develop a mating attack by simply advancing the f pawn, if needed, together with the g pawn, and then checkmate black with rook h8. Instead, black chose to bring his knight to the game and played knight c4. And now this is a critical moment. It's quite important which pawn to push. It would not favor white to push the f pawn, because then Black would trade, get rid of the weakness on g6, and get the knight into the defense just on time. On one hand, now Black threatens the pawn on c3, and after f6, now not capturing the pawn immediately, which would be very dangerous because of bishop g6 followed by a checkmate threat, but instead knight f7, and that guards the key h8 square and at the same time attacks the pawn on f6, and now all of a sudden it is Black who is better. Let's go back. After king f8, rook h7, rook c6, g4, knight c4. So here we were, and this was the moment when we looked at the situation after white advances with f5. What's much better is to advance the pawn g5. Now white is targeting the pawn on g6, threatening to attack it directly with rook h6. For example, against a random move such as a5, white would play rook h6, attacking the pawn a second time, and when that pawn would get defended, then white could use the pin along the 6th rank on the g6 pawn and play f5 with a much better position. Black decided not to wait for that to happen and instead gave knight e3 check. King moved to f3, attacking the knight, and the knight jumped into f5, preventing the above-mentioned threat. But now white had something else in mind. White traded bishop for knight, of course. Capturing right now on c3 with the rook would not help Black, because the white king would just move to g4, and then when pawn takes bishop, just king takes pawn. And the king would become a very strong attacking piece. The game continued with pawn takes. And this is a very important moment for rook endgames, when the king all of a sudden will play a very important and active role. White sacrifices even a pawn. King g3, rook captures, and king h4. Rook f3, Black is going pawn hunting, but this position is not about pawns. g6, opening the route for the white king to become a very strong attacking piece. Rook captures, king g5, and if now rook d4, king f6, and all of a sudden Black will get either checkmated or the white pawn just will get promoted. Quite impressive. Let's go back to this position. Remember, this is where Black captured the pawn, came king h4, rook to f3, g6, rook captured on f4, king g5, and the game continued with rook e4. And king f6 anyway, threatening with the rook h8 checkmate, king g8. And now an important move, not immediately rook captures pawn, but rook g7, even better. King h8 and rook c7. Again, renewing the checkmate threat, forcing the black rook back. And now white has already various ways to win, but just chose the simple king takes pawn. Rook e4, king f6, again threatening with rook c8. Came the check, king e5, rook g4, and now white just plays g7. A very typical method when the pawn endgame is winning, to put the pawn in a so-called protected square in a way, because now if rook takes pawn, rooks get exchanged, and then the white king takes the pawn in the middle on d5, the d pawn or the a pawn will get promoted. King moved to g8, and now white is collecting the pawns. rook g1, king d5, rook c1, king d6. Of course, this is already easily winning. I'll just show you the last couple of moves of the game. There are multiple ways to win here already, but the bottom line is you just want to promote one of the pawns. Okay, let's move on to our next instructive example. Here we go. We have this position where white is a pawn up, but it has opposite colored bishops. So imagine that the rooks would be gone from the board, as well as the pawns on the queen side. The game would be a very easy draw for black. For example, if white right now would proceed by capturing the pawn, allowing black to capture the pawn, and then capture on b7, we would exactly reach that kind of position where basically on a higher level people would agree to a draw, and even on a club level, after white trying most of the time, black would be able to secure a draw. But remember, the power on being on the 7th rank is quite important. And even in this position, that's what white will try to accomplish. It's true that the rook would be able to move there right away. However, then black again would be able to capture the pawn on a2, as for now the black bishop guards the key d8 square, so therefore white wouldn't give back rank checkmate. The correct move is moving the rook to c5. It's a very fine move because it ties the black rook to the 8th rank. So the rook is not able to capture on a2 for now because of the checkmate coming on c8. If on the other hand the bishop captures on b2, then white would capture on b5, gaining a tempo by attacking the black bishop. And then when the bishop retreats, after rook takes pawn, again the rook is tied to the 8th rank to guard a back rank checkmate with rook b8. Going back to the starting position where white plays rook c5 in this game that was, by the way, played by the famous Nimzovich versus Thalberg in 1934, black responded by playing king f8. And now comes the second important move, protecting the pawn on a2 before grabbing the black pawns. If now bishop takes on b2, rook takes pawn on b5, attacking the bishop as well as the pawn on b7, and white will win a second pawn. Black responded by playing b4, and now finally the white rook arrived on the 7th rank. Bishop captured b2, and now white captures one pawn and the second pawn. So now white is up a second pawn, and 2 pawns are usually enough to win, especially if the rooks are still on the board. Came bishop to c3, and here comes a third pawn using a discovery attack. Bishop takes, and black resigned. Let's see our next example. This position has been played by another world champion, Tigran Petrosyan, against Uzi in 1958. At the moment, there is material balance. Of course, we can see that white can immediately win a pawn by capturing black's pawn on c5. However, white may be to do even better than that. We can also see that the white rook is already on the 7th rank on c7. But rooks are especially powerful and dangerous when they get to the 7th rank in pairs. If both rooks are on the 7th rank, very often that can result in a checkmate threat or a threat to win a rook or other major material. So in this case, white, instead of just settling of winning a pawn, which is not bad certainly, and probably results also in a win, but a longer one, white chose to simply move the rook to e5. What that means is that now the rook is about to come to e7, and there's nothing that black can do about it. Black played rook c3, trying to counterattack on white's pawn on a3. But black doesn't achieve much with that. White just proceeds with the plan and plays rook e7. Black captured the pawn, and so did white. We're still having material balance. And at the moment, white is unable to capture the pawn on c5, because then the rook would be falling on h7. Came rook c to g7 and king f8. And now the rook simply captured the pawn, and now white has 3 connected passed pawns, and in fact very soon white can create some checkmate threats as well. If right now black would play rook c8, then already white would go for this trade of rooks, because it would in addition result in winning black's c-pawn. The game instead continued by black playing rook e8. And now white simply went after the black c-pawn by playing rook c6. King g8 and rook h to c7. Now both rooks are attacking the pawn on c5, and black is helpless against protecting it. Black resigned. And now let's see the jewel of the week, an absolutely beautiful endgame position. Here we go. In this position, black at the moment has a very significant material advantage. However, a lot of the black pieces are hanging, and in addition, white has a potential to promote the h-pawn. As usual, I suggest you take your time and try to figure out the solution yourself before you listen to the correct solution. If right now white would capture, for example, the knight, black would recapture and be fine. Because after, for example, pawn captures, rook captures, black would be still ahead in material. Also, after pawn takes, knight takes, king takes, black would be much ahead. Amazingly, the solution is to promote the pawn, which if you saw, black playing rook h2 looks scary at first. Nevertheless, after this win of the queen, the black pieces end up in such unfortunate positions that even though black is 2 rooks and the bishop up, it is still white who is winning. Of course, not by capturing the knight nor the rook, but by playing knight d7, forcing black, making the only move, king to g7, f6, king h7. What a pitiful position of the black bishop and rook. Neither can move, quite incredibly. And here, white needs to be very careful again which pawn to capture the knight with. If white would capture with the f-pawn, all of a sudden the black pieces could get rescued by the f-pawn moving ahead. However, after the d-pawn capturing, black would be pretty helpless. Now, after any rook move, The white knight would appear on f8, check, rook captures, and now the point is that the pawn captures the rook and does not become a queen, but becomes a knight. Very impressive and very sad for black, but very beautiful endgame. A good example of under promotion. So what did we learn in this lesson? Our primary subject in the lesson was about the importance of the 7th rank. The reason why occupying the 7th rank with the rook is so good and so important is that it attacks pawns that are located in the 7th rank, and usually at least a couple of the pawns are still there even in the endgame. Second of all, it oftentimes limits the opponent's king from active participation in the endgame. And in some of these cases, we saw the cooperation of the rook with either the bishop or the king to target a pawn or even a mating attack. Remember, in the Capablanca game, the second example, we saw how the king became such an active participant in the attack. So remember, while in the beginning of the game you certainly want to hide your king, even in the middle of the game you don't want to move much your king, the end game, when there are few pieces left, you definitely want to involve your king as well, either to attack opponent's pawns or sometimes even trying to create a mating threat. Well, thank you for listening and keep coming back week after week to learn more chess advice. So long until next week.